Constitutional Conversations is a series of discussions by America's leading scholars about the principles, framing, ratification, and implementation of constitutional government in the United States. This series is hosted by the James Madison Memorial Fellowship Foundation of Alexandria, Virginia.
Slavery existed in every state in the Union at the time of the American Revolution. The northern states had quite a few fewer slaves than the southern states did, and so the southern states would be less willing to emancipate their slaves, partly because of racism, partly because of the economic need that was there. There were also fewer Quakers in the southern states. Quakers were very prevalent in several of the northern states, particularly in Pennsylvania and in Rhode Island. And they were staunch advocates for emancipation, for the elimination of the slave trade, and for abolition of slavery in general. And so in 1780, Pennsylvania passes the first gradual emancipation law. The preamble was written by Thomas Paine, who was the clerk of the Assembly, and this provided that at a certain point in time, it was a certain date, every child born to a slave mother would be free. The status of a child was always determined by the condition of the mother, not the father, and not the physical appearance of the child. The child could look to be white, could pass for white, but if the child was born to a slave mother, the child was a slave. And so Pennsylvania passes the first gradual emancipation law. Other northern states follow suit. You have to determine in these laws, when will the child leave the mother? The child will stay with the mother for a certain period of time until they're an adult. The compromise position in Pennsylvania was adulthood was 28. Now that was not true in any state in the Union. Everybody realized it was either 18 or 21, usually 18 for women, 21 for men. But the compromise to get that bill passed was 28, was adulthood in Pennsylvania. And so each state passes these gradual emancipation laws. In Virginia, so many slaves were put into the army, many of them serving as substitutes for the sons of wealthy planters. And it was realized that these blacks in the army were coming out of the army as slaves. And so they passed a bill in 1782 making it easier for Virginians to free their slaves, either when they were alive or in their wills. And so quite a bit of emancipation took place in Virginia at that time. And then finally, I would say, it was easier to emancipate slaves in the North because racism was less significant in the North, with smaller populations and slaves being spread throughout the country, many one or two on a farm. There was not so much racism as there was in the South. Now, what happens is when you do get a sizable free population in the North, racism rears its ugly head in the North, just as well as in the South. And so there's racism both places, and the abolitionists, who are heavily located in the North, alienate many people, not only in the South, but also in the North because of this racism that exists. And finally, I would say, in the South, the great leaders don't stand up and serve as an example. George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, they don't free their slaves. Lafayette writes a letter to Washington in 1783 suggesting, let's buy a plantation in the west of Virginia and put freedmen there to show, first of all, that they can survive on their own, and second of all, that you endorse the abolition of slavery. That didn't happen. Washington said, let's talk about it when you come back to America in 1784. There's no record that they talked about it. Lafayette institutes his plan in Cayenne in the French West Indies, but that plan is not implemented in Virginia. And as I say, the leadership in the South does not make a bold statement for abolition.
Constitutional Conversations is made possible by a generous grant from the Fairleigh S. Dickinson Jr. Foundation. Constitutional Conversations is made possible by the James Madison Education Fund.